want to introduce our last speaker of today. After that, I promise only fun today. Valdis is our good cooperation partner. He's a great speaker and speaks very simple so that I understand what he speaks, but he knows a lot. So he's a researcher of the Latvian Defense Institute and historian, I guess you deny that. Yes, the floor is yours.
Okay, thank you very much. Yes, I'm a historian. I started work 30 years ago in Latvian War Museum. Last 10 years I work in the National Defense Academy of Latvia. So my basic job is to buzzer cadets with unpronounceable place names, surnames and dates they forget immediately. We'll try to do that today as well with you. And actually I would like to say a big thank you to Vladimir and colleague from Estonia. I didn't recognize the name, I'm sorry for that, but you actually did my job. So you were actually talking about what I'm gonna talk right now. How we can talk about Soviet era and how we can create this storytelling thing. I know every one of you is watching that watch right now, 12:30 lunch. Okay, I will not talk 30 minutes as planned. I'll talk shorter. So, but I will most likely will overspend a little bit of lunchtime. But I've been told it's okay. Lunch will not run away from us. So today is already mentioned. Martin's mentioned 25th of March 1949. Today in Latvia we have Remembrance Day. So the day went from Baltic countries almost. Depends how we count, but almost 90,000, 100,000 people were sent away. That story is part of my family as well. So that morning, my grandmother, Marta Šušarte, was loaded on a truck and sent from the home she lived to Siberia. And what's interesting, my mother was born on that train, somewhere in between Jēkabpils and Pacific Ocean. Why on that big range? Because when my mother was born on April 16th, nobody wanted to sign that there is a child born because most likely that child should die within an hour or a few days. Because I'm here, you already guessed, my mother survived. So after 2 weeks, she was actually written. So on her birth certificate, there is some train station mentioned, which is a bit of a problem for her today because he's a little bit in astrology. She's in astrology, and you have to know, it's the first question, where you were born. She just didn't know. The spread is about 1,000 kilometers on that railway train. They came back, and in 1950s, they never came back officially to that house because house burned down during World War II. There was just a small storage place that was rebuilt, but we quite often try to visit that place as often as possible. So this picture is from roughly 1985. 3 adults and 2 kids loaded in that small kind of vehicle, Zaporozhets it was called back then. And you see some of the things that we carried berries and mushrooms back. Sometimes berries instantly transferred into juice, and it was quite a miserable experience. So we tried to travel to that place quite often as possible. So yeah, it was never officially back as family-owned place. And at some point in about 1987, as I know today, as we traveled, that's nearby Ļaudona, what I noticed, when we rode by, as we entered Ļaudona place, this monument appeared. So 1987, there is apparently something happened on that place. And as a kid, and I'm born in 1976, we traveled quite a lot. And oh, what's there? We have to stop, we have to stop. We have to stop every single time we travel there because to see. Nothing new happened, but that is a big part of airplane. And that's a picture that was taken a few years ago. And yesterday, so apparently it was on 16th of October 1987, a Soviet airplane went down and a pilot died as it's written on the line of duty. And yesterday that place looked like that. So I traveled there to do a little bit of a job in my new man cave over there, and it's gone. It's not there anymore. And it was not just a random monument, it was actually real fin of an airplane. So if you fancy to gather some aluminium, you can go there and pick a few bits that left there, but it's gone, so it's not there anymore. So what happened? And Martin's already talked about that story. It's February 2022, that Vladimir Putin decided that he fancied a war in the middle of Europe. Hundreds of thousands of people died, Ukrainians suffering. And during that early spring, Latvian government asked not to celebrate publicly 9th of May, as you know, is the most important celebration in Russia Federation today. But some of our citizens decided that they are not gonna politely oblige to that, and they decided to show that they are happy to be citizens, or kind of encouraging Russian army to continue. That's how it looked on 9th of May, early morning. Some flowers were there. There were not a large unrest, so to speak, but there was some pushing and shoving later that day. So the Latvian government 1 month later decided to pass a new law which said that every object glorifying Soviet and Nazi regimes should be removed. And of course I just posted a few pages from that object, from that law. That law you can find online as well. But now we have a question. What is an object glorifying Soviet and Nazi regime? And apparently that kind of idea could be very, very wide, starting from monuments. And of course the most noticeable monument, I started the first picture a few slides ago, is that so-called Victory Monument. That was not its official name, but it was used as a Victory Monument in the middle of Riga in August 2022. It was destroyed, and then additionally some other objects were removed. That airplane fin as well, which I remember as a small kid traveling by. So which leads to us to a question: what shall we do about that? Is there a place in our mnemonic cardiogram, as Martin talked, a place? And he already kind of answered this question. No, there's no place for us, because that Soviet time is kind of in that place of silence. We moved on. And some other speakers talk about this question as well, that Soviet era is the kind of widely most accepted role for that era is victimhood. Us being victims, us being victimized by Soviet Union. And we already talked about trauma, that Soviet era is trauma for us. And of course, I started with a story with my grandmother. She was not treated very, very well by Soviet regime, so that for me would be very understandable way to just push it away and switch to something else. Let's talk about this area, creation of Latvian independence and things like that. And of course, if we switch to what's left, for example, that monument is Il-28 fighter bomber that was placed not far away from Riga airport in Skulte areas. It was a former Soviet army base. And of course, that airplane is from 50s, 60s, 70s, but the plaque right there, the monument said that that unit that was located in this area bombed Berlin in 1941, which makes no sense if we look on this airplane, of course, and by doing that, it's somehow showing that we are proud Soviet citizens, that we bombed Nazi Germany, so that airplane is not in this place anymore. I just show two examples of that, but there are numerous. For example, one is in Viljaka place. The red partisan movement that was removed as well, and we can go from very, very different places. The places that are still there, and I talk about that in a minute, are Brethren cemeteries. And of course, that Brethren cemeteries today are the places where some of the, let's put it that way, Russian supporters tend to visit. They commemorate fallen soldiers, but in a way that once in a while it's kind of very Russia supportive. We're not talking about history anymore in those places. We are talking about, do you support Russia in today's invasion against Ukraine, yes or no? So I will try to talk about show a few examples how, in my humble opinion, that Soviet era had some part in that mnemonic cardiogram, how we observe, if not support, how we can talk about that. And of course, when we look on a map, I just wanted to show you can check on that map Soviet era, and of course you will find a few tens of different places. There are fortifications, there are bunkers. Of course, predominantly what we have from Soviet era are freedom fighters, national partisans, who were fighting against Soviet regime just after the World War II ended. We can see some of the examples how we already saw Milan Ivanenko, for example, her experience in Siberia and coming back, and we kind of talk about that. But what I would like to highlight two parts of those Soviet era sites and stories, which we might look from a different angle. Not just victimhood and freedom fighters, but can we have a place for those Soviet bunkers and places like that? And actually, this is the part. The number one is when we look at different monuments. I showed this red partisan monument, and we had a few other monuments, and that airplane thing that was removed. In my opinion, as a historian who I'm reading quite a lot, not only about 20th century's history, reading about a lot of stuff as well, almost every time. And the picture right here is from very famous Latvian German chronicle Brotze, who lived in late 18th century, and he pictured a monument from northern Estonia. He traveled around in that place, and he found a cross. And on that cross there was an inscription in two languages, the actual Russian language and German language, talking about battles that happened in vicinity of that area where many Russians and Germans died. And I would argue that monuments like that are old European tradition. We tend to look on those monuments as a Soviet relic. So we see, oh, there is a soldier like concrete Ivan standing in the middle of nowhere, which has no meaning of what happened here. There is no cemetery, there is just a monument. It's been going on that way in Western Europe for the last 500 years, in different places, after different wars, and that crosses like that had a place in our, again, I'm loving this slide mnemonic cardiogram, how we talked about experience. Even though none of the Estonians, I believe, participated in that particular battle, still there is a place to talk about. There's something on the roadside, okay, there was a battle, oh, interesting, what happened in this place. And of course, if we go, this, for example, again, it's not 20th century, it's Great Northern Wars that happened in Latvia. On the left-hand side, you see the monument from Lucavsala, that's an island in the middle of Riga, on Daugava River. There was a battle where Swedish army destroyed a Russian unit, and of course, at the time that battle happened, nobody kind of paid big attention whom was buried where, and only at the beginning of 20th century, the Russian Empire erected a monument like that you see on this slide. And of course, there is a debate, an ongoing debate. Shall we remove that monument because if not Soviet Union supportive, it's Russian imperialism supportive monument, so we have to remove that. Decision is not made yet, but I've seen quite a few discussions in government institutions. Shall we remove that one? And on the right-hand side, it's 1705 Mūrmuiža battle, where the Sweden army beat Russian army. Two monuments in the middle of nowhere for no reason. Some random armies fighting again. There is discussion how to remove or not remove. In my humble opinion, it still should be in that place, because you travel there, oh, what happened there? It creates that first important thing each historian should have, or wannabe historian, it's to ask a question. Why, when, who, what's the point, and so on. And then that will lead you to searching for good answers. And why is that? Why that tradition is, and this is a very famous picture from that same early 18th century, the bad war of Spanish, the wars that happened in Europe. The Duke of Marlborough is right here. In the lower left corner you see another very typical European tradition that lasted for 100 years. As soon as soldier died on a battlefield, local farmers immediately stripped that person, because the war is very interesting, but we have the business to do. We need some money. So after a few hours, the battlefield is with naked people, dead naked people. And after another few hours, there's no way you can understand who is that person, French or British in this case. They're all the same naked male persons. So for a very long time in Western Europe, just erecting a monument on the place the battlefield happened without designating who was a winner or loser, right or wrong, was a very long-standing tradition. Nowadays, of course, we know our Kennungsmark, we found it's a German soldier, but back then it was how the battlefields looked like. So in my opinion, there is still a place for airplane thing in the middle of nowhere, just to ignite a question. What happened right here? And maybe searching for an answer will create a more educated society that will give us, as a society, I'm not talking about everyone should be historian, no, but just asking a question and searching for answer is a benefit in itself. Not just, okay, the Soviets are occupied. Now, what happened? I'm taking my phone, I'm starting to Google, mission accomplished. Of course, there are a lot of technical difficulties within that, how to Google, what not to Google, where to go, where not to go, what to read. But that thing in itself, that's asking a question, is of great social benefit. And this is on the outskirts of Riga. About that monument, I know for sure there is a plan to remove that monument, because it's, on one hand, it's allegedly it's a part of cemetery. But I'm not going into detail right now about how the Soviets were building these cemeteries or rebuilding their cemeteries after World War II. Quite often there is no fallen soldiers in those cemeteries at all. Soldiers were left on the field, just as some monument moved in random place. There's another story to that. But if we look on different Soviet kind of symbols, quite often we see, oh, this monument is changing narratives. No, monument is not changing narratives. People changing narratives, creating narratives, or opposing to narratives. Just a simple rock is not doing nothing. It's just our opinion about that. So I believe that if there is a still place for that. And second place, what I would like to look at, okay, Vladimir already mentioned, yes, we demolished all our missile sites. But since there is one in Lithuania, we're happy to give that one to you. Well done. So we don't need 5 of them in BALTIC. So it's kind of like that. This is from Barta area. And how those, and again, we talked about, and I think Vladimir pointed very well, it's not about the sign, it's not about the money. You need an idea, you need a story behind what's happening there. And just to give an example how my most interesting story about a missile site happened 20 years ago, when in Latvia we have a Danish military training advisory team, and they approached me, a historian I worked in War Museum back then, and they said, we would like to visit one particular missile site. I said, why do you have to visit that one? We have a few nearby. Well, why is that? It was in Vaino, the area. No, we have to go. There is a reason for that. We traveled, me and 12 Danish military personnel. They arrived at that base. They said, Valdis, could you take a picture of us standing at that silo? There is no that silo anymore. There is Latvian army ammunition site right there now. I took a picture and I said, why? He said, when I joined Army in 1985, we knew that this particular missile we're standing right now was pointed at Copenhagen. So fast forward 30 years, no more missiles pointed at Copenhagen anymore. We won. That was kind of their story. We won. I'm kind of oversimplifying all that story, but it was very important for them to visit that place because there is no missiles anymore, and Latvia will join NATO at that moment and things like that. So telling that story and giving a little bit more than just a concrete bunkers and things like that is very important. And just to show another, and I would like to, we don't have so much time, I'll skip some of those slides and make my point a bit shorter. When you, and I visited a few, you colleagues know, a few very nice places right here in Latvia. This is from Dundage. You have some Soviet equipment, you have an owner still looking nice and tight, dressed as a Soviet army, whatever officer he is, can't see anymore. But he is right here. And it gives, it's not just about Soviet era being oppressive era as such. It gives a little bit of insight. And in my, again, in just my humble opinion, we don't have to be victims all the time. Just we people, and again, I'm born in 1976. I remember my childhood as a very bright and very happy period of my life. I didn't know that we had no money whatsoever, but who cares about money when you're 10 years old? And of course, when I look back and when I tell stories to the people who visit, like I work quite a lot with some NATO officers, how it was in Soviet times, and I try to tell what it was like, what you try to do. And it's, my story is not that it was always oppressive 24/7 for months in a row. Just because you're living, you're creating family, you're having child, you're having small dreams to create something good, whatever it is, a garden, for example. I don't know what was your experience. My childhood was all about gardening every single time. So we were producing gazillion of everything from the plot like this room. So that is a story in itself, how to achieve that, for example. All the small gardens around Riga and things like that. Moving forward, what I believe is, this is from Seda. So Seda, one of the most Soviet-looking small villages northeast of Valmiera. There was a turf factory in that area, a peat bogging place, and it's still, most of the Seda was built like a typical Soviet village, let's call it that way. And still you have Joseph Stalin and Lenin portrait, and picture is from military heritage, of course. That's where you go if you're interested about interesting stuff. And it showed that you can talk, yes, you can talk about Soviet era. There is a place to talk about that, and you can find some good things about that. And of course, the most famous one, and why most famous one, because people traveling to Liepaja always want to visit Karavosta, this prison, where you have a show. And again, I'm doubling up what Vladimir said. You don't need a museum in every old building at all. I worked in a museum for 20 years. I know what museum looks like. It's quite boring actually sometimes. And working in a museum, yeah, you know, all the paperwork you have to do, nightmares. So you don't need a museum as a museum in every single old building. What you need a little bit of emotion. And you talked about facts versus emotion, and I believe there is a term to so microhistory, where you can actually teach history based on human experience. You have a life story of the human being who went through different emotions, and that life is a fact. Of course, sometimes you tend to oversimplify some things, or maybe you describe some things that never happened. As a human being, I'm doing that all the time. But that microhistory is a big part of how we do understand history in general today. It has a very specific role in that. and creating a show and trying to talk what might be an experience of a Soviet soldier in Cuba is big part of how we can understand how it was history in Soviet Union as well. And of course you have different sites. This is from, forget the name, nearby here. Now this is from Vecmilgravis. You have a Soviet bunker, and of course, in my opinion, one of the best preserved bunkers is in Ligatny area. Is you go there, that is a time capsule, that's a time machine. You go there and you can see how it looked like. And I specifically picked that picture because when you talk about Soviet times, there is a place for a laugh in that story. Most likely than not, when you remember what happened in Soviet times, you will try to find some happy stories what happened over there. And right here you see the people kind of enjoying. And sometimes I've been asked that question quite often. Can you talk about happy times in Soviet era? Because we were occupied, it was a very traumatized period. Can we? And I believe, yes, we can. Yes, we can create that emotion based on microhistory, and I'll show you some examples. So here we have a very, very famous movie, Life is Beautiful, Oscar nominated, and Jojo Rabbit, where they talked about Nazi regime atrocities. They talked about Holocaust, a very, very dark period in European history when genocide happened. It's not what we can laugh about, or can we? And in my opinion, yes, there is a place how to design that storytelling. Is we can find not always we shall look about dark parts of our history. And of course, I would like to end mine with Rowan Atkinson, who said a few years ago, and again, Martin already showed a few pictures about monuments being removed of so-called wokeism. And Rowan Atkinson, he said in Parliament, that is a quote I find, that the right to offend is far more important. And once in a while, it's very difficult. In Latvia, especially, for example, today, 24th of March, 1949, it's a very tragic day. Can we laugh about the experiences of those days that happened so long ago? And of course, I would like to finish with my grandmother. I started with my grandmother, I will finish with my grandmother. She was not her own actress. She was never joking. At least I cannot remember any jokes whatsoever from her. What the stories she was telling me, or maybe there were some jokes I didn't feel as those were funny enough for me to laugh. But she never portrayed herself as a victim. Yes, she was sent to Siberia, her house burned down, she came back and this was that. She was always into gardening. The rabbits one day appeared in our courtyard to sort of kind of what's going on. Mother asked that question. Rabbits. There's a new business plan. We'll be growing rabbits right now. She always looked at her experience from, I have a life, I have children, and my small goals are the goals which we could celebrate, even in that dark age. And every story she told was about her success to survive. Of course, as human beings today, as we look back, I would never ever wanted to survive in that mode. But I guess I would kind of double up on what you talked about, the Ukrainian experience. Ukrainians right now, I guess, I've never been Ukrainian recently, but I'm kind of using you as a quote right now. As they look on their experience today, and they will look back, hopefully after their victory, that was a life, and we can talk about that life without us being victims all the time necessarily. And on that, I would like to finish. Thank you very much. And I guess we will have some questions, and I guess we can open questions and answers section for at least 10 minutes.
Yeah.
Yeah, can we? Okay. Yeah, we have a question again.
So it's, thank you very much for your presentation. Can't we change whole narrative from being victim to